There's an understandable debate over whether the war was worth fighting, whether the fight is worth winning, and whether we can win it.
Iraqis welcomed 2008 with cautious optimism. The troop surge had contributed to diffusing some of the sectarian tensions in Baghdad. But the lack of political progress meant that security gains remained fragile and reversible. And on the very first day of the year, they were put to the test when a suicide bomber blew himself up at a funeral in Baghdad, killing 30 people. It was the worst attack in months. Violence was down from the previous year, but still at the levels of 2005, when there were as many as 100 attacks per day. Even so, for residents of the capital, it was an improvement, although living conditions remained poor.
We need peace. We can eat onion and bread and bear everything. Even we don't want electricity or anything else, but we need peace. This is the most important thing for us. It's a sad thing.
Just 50 kilometers northeast of Baghdad, the Diyala province had become a melting pot of all of the conflicts that had plagued Iraq since 2003.
Diyala has proven to be a very, very challenging area because, of course, it's not just Sunni Arabs who gave tacit approval to al-Qaeda. It is a substantial Sunni population with an equal Shia population or thereabouts. There's been some displacement and migration, and you have also a Sunni Kurd population in the northeast as well. In among that, you have al-Qaeda elements, you have Sunni insurgent elements, you have Shia militia elements.
As a fallout of the security crackdown in Baghdad, al-Qaeda fighters had migrated to this region, once known for its oranges and pomegranates. They were pursued by Shia militiamen. The province was engulfed by this same brutal cycle of revenge killings that had destroyed Baghdad. So on January 8th, a year after Bush announced the troop surge, US and Iraqi forces launched yet another military offensive, Operation Phantom Phoenix in the Diyala province. While Washington remained desperate for a military solution, it was also becoming impatient with Iraq's leaders. And with the onset of an election year in the US, the pressure was on Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to make some serious political compromises.
Washington has its own politics. This is a real problem from day one, by the way. Fast Washington clock is super fast. Benchmarks, here, there, do this, do that. Baghdad clock is slow but deliberate, and it's much more natural.
But inside the green zone, politicians were taking tiny steps. On January 12th, a half-empty parliament approved one of the benchmarks set by the Bush administration. The Accountability and Justice Law was meant to reverse the devastating de-Baathification edict issued by Paul Bremer in 2003. Many said it actually opened the door to a new witch hunt.
As far as I can tell, that law was more or less hijacked by the Sutter movement, which is no friend of ex-Baathists, and actually requires possibly thousands of Sunni Arabs and Baathists to be fired from ministries where they are now employed.
After pushing so hard for this law, viewed as essential to unite Iraq's factions, the Americans became cautious in fully endorsing it.
I think this will come down to implementation. It will come down to who is implementing it and what the guidelines are for its implementation.
Over the month of January, the bloodshed increased dramatically in the northern city of Mosul. It had become al-Qaeda in Iraq's new stronghold. And on January 25, 2008, Nouri al-Maliki announced the launch of a new offensive in Mosul, Operation Lion's Roar, led by the Prime Minister himself. At the same time, Baghdad was still reeling from devastating massive bombings, a reminder of how fragile the security gains really were. On the 1st of February, 2 explosions rocked 2 pet markets in the capital, killing 99 people. The attacks were carried out by 2 female suicide bombers. The women were said to have Down syndrome, for some, proof of Al-Qaeda's increasing desperation.
It's pockets now. There's no unified leadership. There's no strong leadership. There are lack of communication. They find it extremely difficult to recruit people. So they run out of suicide bombers.
More and more attacks were being carried out by female suicide bombers. 5 years of bloodshed and misery meant that many had lost their husbands or children. The most vulnerable proved the perfect recruiting targets for Al-Qaeda, now that it had lost the support of many of the Sunni armed groups and tribes. And women had less trouble getting through security. As US forces were pushing through the Diyala province, more and more awakening councils were formed to root out Al-Qaeda from these areas. By February, there were about 130 councils, totaling 100,000 armed men, vetted and financed by the US. As America's new allies, they increasingly became the focus of Al-Qaeda's firepower.
The fighters are trying to kill us, but if we don't fight them, the situation could become much worse. The path for freedom requires inevitable sacrifices. We have to go to the streets in order to keep our area safe. We investigate any sound of gunfire. If we hear something, we immediately have to investigate who did it, where and why. However, the government pretends we're doing nothing.
But on February 9th, the newly formed awakening councils in the Diyala province suspended their activity, demanding the removal of the chief of police, a Shia whom they accused of secretly running death squads. The standoff highlighted the urgent need to integrate 100,000 armed men, de facto militiamen, allowed to patrol their areas and sometimes impose their rules on civilians.
There should be no militias anymore. We don't want militia. We need the power of law. This is the most important things. We need to live according to law, like our people. Why militias? If they want to form from themselves a group of people who is caring for their areas, that's good, but not by carrying guns.
Increasingly, these self-styled vigilante groups are demanding recognition for their pivotal role in reducing the violence from the central government. Mostly Sunnis, the awakening councils want to be integrated into the security forces, a demand the government is resisting, saying that it can only absorb a quarter of them.
It will be a mix of us supporting them and the government of Iraq supporting them. The Anbar police have absorbed a substantial number of them. There will be more that will transition. It's been more problematic, to be sure, when you come into the Baghdad neighborhoods, because there are understandable concerns there that perhaps what we've been supporting is just insurgent groups that are trying to wait out the surge.
If this model is collapsed in Iraq, I'm really very much concerned about the future. If those people acknowledge that the government are not prepared, in fact, to welcome them, to accommodate them, yes, they might change their mentality.
But while the Americans attempted to pacify the Sunnis, they were unable to appease the Turks. Iraq was bracing itself for yet another foreign invasion. On February 22nd, Turkey launched a ground operation to go after PKK rebels based in the mountains of northern Iraq. The one-week-long offensive took place in remote areas away from Kurdish towns and villages. The US and Baghdad had given their green light, but failed to warn Kurdish authorities of the impending assault.
We didn't have any information, and no one had contacted us. But through monitoring the border and Turkish movements and knowing that the US had given them a green light for limited strikes, we expected it. This was a very dangerous violation. We are part of Iraq, and Baghdad is for us as much as it is for others. We don't expect that anyone takes decisions in Baghdad without consulting us.
Iraq's Kurds suspected that Turkey's real aim was to destabilize their region. The Kurds had constitutionally obtained the right for a referendum in oil-rich Kirkuk, a city they perceive as historically Kurdish. The vote could give the Kurds regional authority over Kirkuk. Ankara fiercely opposes the referendum, fearing it will lead to an independent Kurdish state at its southern border.
Well, this is not their business. I'm sorry to say that. This is not their business. It's an Iraqi business. It's purely Iraqi business. It's nobody else's business. It is a huge challenge. And see, the referendum in Kirkuk and the normalization in Kirkuk and the reversal of Saddam sectarian and ethnic cleansing policy in Kirkuk is a constitutional duty. We should have fulfilled this duty last year. To get this constitutional duty done, you need to prepare the ground. We haven't done that.
The referendum, first scheduled for the end of 2007, is still to take place. The Kurds insist there can be no more delays.
It is constitutional. If the constitution ceases to exist, then so will Iraq. Not solving the problem of Kirkuk and other regions means that Iraq will face a serious danger. Do they want Iraq to remain unstable?